Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in Argentina. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that we've been following the progress of Argentina for the last 3 years or so. And on the 10th of December 2023, Javier Milei took over as president. So he's now been in power for more than 12 months. And I think that's probably a long enough period to take an assessment as to how things are going. The first 6 months or so, obviously, you're just needing to sort things out. You're dealing with a lot of stuff that was left for you by the previous rulers. But over the last 6 months, we've started to see the impact of Milei's policies starting to feed through. So what's happening? Is he doing a good job? Is he on the right track? Or are things getting worse? Well, let's start off by having a look at some of the data. This chart shows the movement in the official rate of inflation over the past 12 months. And as you can see, in December 23, when Milei took over, inflation was sitting at 211%. Now, interestingly, as part of his first speech, he said that things were going to get worse before they got better. And he was absolutely right in terms of inflation because, as you can see, by April 24, inflation had risen to 292%. However, as you can also see, over the past 7 months, inflation has reduced in every single month. And the most recent data for November 24 shows that the current year-on-year inflation is sitting at 166%, which is around 50 percentage points lower than it was when he first took over. So clearly, from that point of view, things are looking better today than they were this time last year. Now, one of the problems when looking at an annualised rate is that you have a lot of historic inflation built into that 12-month figure. So in order to establish how things are going right now, we need to have a look at what's going on the monthly inflation data. This chart shows the monthly movements for inflation in Argentina over the past 12 months. And what this shows is that in December 23, when Javier Milei took over, monthly inflation was increasing by more than 25%. So prices were going up 25% every single month. That's not the annual inflation figure. That's measuring 1 month against the next month. However, as you can see from this chart, between December 23 and November 24, the monthly rate of inflation has reduced dramatically. And the most recent figure shows that inflation in November 24 increased by 2.4%, which is the lowest figure seen in Argentina since July 2020, so for more than 4 years. So that data shows us that Javier Milei's policies are working. We're starting to see inflation going in the right direction. The rate of increase in prices is starting to slow down. However, this isn't time for mass celebration just yet, because Argentina still has the highest rate of inflation out of all of the countries in the G20, and in fact, of every single country in the world. And you can see that the only other countries that have inflation in triple digits are Syria and South Sudan, which are both war-torn countries. So that really puts into perspective just how severe the problems in Argentina are right now. And if we have a look at what's happening to food prices, which is an important metric because food price increases affect the poorest members of society the most because they're spending a larger portion of their budget on food. When Milei took over in December 23, food prices were increasing by more than 250%. That figure rose to a high of 308% in March 24. However, over the past 8 months, we have seen the rate of increase of food prices starting to slow down. And the latest data for November 24 show that the rate of increase is now down to 147%, which is more than 100 percentage points lower than it was when Milei took over, which once again is very encouraging. However, Argentina still has the highest rate of food inflation out of every single country in the world. And in fact, only one other country, Zimbabwe, has food inflation of more than 100%. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll know that we've spoken a lot about the relationship between interest rates and inflation. And traditional theory says that when you have high inflation, you should increase interest rates because, firstly, that increases the cost of borrowing, so it discourages companies and people from taking on more debt, which they will then use to spend in the economy, drive up demand, and therefore push prices up further. And also, high interest rates encourage people to put money into the bank because you can earn a nice return by just leaving it in the bank and being paid interest. So the theory says that when you have high inflation, you should increase interest rates. However, when Javier Milei took over, interest rates were sitting at 126%. My goodness me, that is a very high rate. And inflation was at 211%. And basically, the link between interest rates and inflation had been broken in Argentina, partly because a lot of people were not using the Argentine peso. There was a high level of dollarization. People preferred to be paid in dollars and to use dollars rather than using the peso. And so increasing interest rates didn't have the same sort of impact because a lot of people weren't actually using the Argentine currency. And this chart shows the movement in the official interest rate in Argentina over the past 3 years. And what you can see from this is that since Javier Milei took over, he has reduced interest rates on 8 separate occasions, with the most recent being on December the 6th, 2024, to the current level of 32%. And if we look at this graphic, which plots both the interest rate and what's been happening with inflation, you can see that over that same period, inflation has come down. So this is contrary to the traditional theory that we just spoke about, which says that the impact of lowering interest rates will be to increase inflation. In Argentina, we've seen the opposite happening. And as we just discussed, this is because the relationship between interest rates and inflation is different in Argentina now due to the fact that there is a high level of dollarization. This chart shows the movement in the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Argentine peso over the past 5 years. And as you can see from this chart, there is not a lot of historic volatility. And the reason for that is because Argentina manages its exchange rate. This isn't a true floating rate. When we see a floating rate, generally you have lots of ups and downs, you have a lot of wavy lines. Here we've got a lot of straight lines and curves. And if we focus in on what's been happening over the past 12 months, one of the first things that Javier Milei did when he took over as president was to devalue the peso. At the time when he took over, the exchange rate was sitting at around 350 pesos to $1. However, after the devaluation, it was trading at around 800 pesos to $1. And over the past 12 months, Argentina has operated what it's called a crawling peg devaluation, whereby the peso devalues at 2% every month. Now, as we've discussed in previous videos, the official exchange rate is almost irrelevant because most people in Argentina are using the black market rate, or what's called the blue dollar rate. And this chart plots the movement in the blue dollar rate over the past 3 years. And what this shows is that when Javier Milei took over, the black market rate for the Argentine peso was around 1,000 to $1. And by the middle of July 24, which is around 8 months after Milei took over, the rate had deteriorated to around 1,500 to $1. However, as you can see, over the past 5 months, the black market rate has actually been improving, and the current exchange rate is around 1,100 to $1. So still more than the official rate. However, the two rates are becoming much closer now. And what the increase in this rate tells us is that there is more confidence now in the Argentine peso than there was 12 months ago. One of the things that Javier Milei has been focusing on is he's trying to get investors to rebuild their confidence in Argentina. So let's have a look at what's been happening to the stock market over the past 12 months. This chart shows the movement in the Merval index, which is the main stock market index in Argentina over the past 12 months. And what this shows is that over the last year, the index has more than doubled, and it's increased on a consistent basis. And this improvement in the stock market tells us that there is improving confidence in Argentine businesses. A lot of the focus for Javier Milei's regime has been on austerity, cutting costs. He's laid off around 45,000 government workers, and he's cut back on things like free medicine for pensioners, which has been very unpopular. But in order to get the economy growing, he needs to get GDP up. So let's have a look at what's been happening to GDP. This chart shows the quarterly reported figures for GDP in Argentina over the past 3 years. And what this shows is that in the quarter when Javier Milei took over as president at the end of 2023, the year-on-year movement in GDP was a fall of 1.2%. That fall increased to 5.1% in the first quarter of 2024. The year-on-year movement remained in negative territory in the second quarter of 24 when it fell by 1.7%. And whilst the official figures have not been published yet for the third quarter of 24, it's estimated that the economy shrank by 2.6%, which is an increase against the figure for the second quarter of 24. So what we're seeing from these GDP figures is that Argentina hasn't yet addressed its problems with regards to its economic output. It's cutting its costs, which is having some benefits, and we're seeing inflation starting to slow down, but we're not yet seeing growth that's being fueled by an expansion of the companies and an increase in profits, and therefore an increase in GDP in Argentina. And that remains a big challenge for Javier Milei. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we've been following the progress of Argentina for more than 3 years now. And the fact that inflation has started to come down, the figures for November 24 are the best that have been seen in Argentina since July 2020, so for more than 4 years. Well, that's the monthly figure anyway. The annual figure still remains at 166%, which puts Argentina out on its own in terms of the highest inflation in the world by some way. So Argentina is not out of the woods yet by any chalk. However, what we are seeing are signs of encouragement. We've talked about it in today's video. Inflation is coming down. Interest rates are coming down. So that means that if you want to borrow money in Argentina, it's much more affordable today at around 32% than it was this time last year when it was above 126%, which is off the scale. Nobody is ever going to borrow money at those sort of levels. So some of the metrics are starting to move in the right direction. However, the actual levels are still eye-watering. We're still talking about inflation of more than 160%. That is really, really expensive. And food inflation, whilst it's coming down, is still sitting at around 150%. So anything that you want to buy today is 150% more expensive than it was this time last year. That's around 2.5 times the price. And the problem that we've got in Argentina is that wages are not rising at that rate. And that's why, as I reported in a previous video, more than 50% of the population are now officially living in poverty. So there is a major crisis going on in Argentina. But as I said right at the start of today's video, Javier Milei inherited a dog's dinner of an economy. It wasn't his fault. He's trying to fix it, but to fix it, it's going to take a long time. And as he said, it's likely to get worse before it got better. And he was absolutely right with that statement. And things are starting to improve. The first year of his presidency really can be divided into two halves. The first half, he was trying to sort things out and everything got worse in terms of all of those metrics. But in the last 6 months, we have definitely seen some green shoots of encouragement. Things are starting to move in the right direction, but it's likely to take years. It isn't going to be fixed overnight. It's not going to be fixed in 2025. Possibly 2026 is when we may see Argentina getting back onto its feet again. It's going to need help. We've talked about it in previous videos. The IMF has given Argentina an increase in its facility. Argentina is the biggest single borrower from the IMF. It's got a huge amount of debt, more than $40 billion. And that figure is likely to keep rising because Argentina needs the money to invest into certain areas of the economy to get its GDP up. And I think that's probably the most worrying sign out of today's video. We're starting to see improvements in some of the basic metrics, but what we really need to see is industry in Argentina starting to fire up again. I talked about in a previous video that Argentina is looking at doing some shale oil and gas. It's got really big reserves. And that was a major boom for the US economy around 20 years ago. So it could happen in Argentina in a similar way, but it won't happen overnight. It takes time to put all of those drills in place, to get all of the extraction out. And Javier Milei has said that the government is not going to sponsor that. He's offered incentives and tax breaks for companies to come in, but he wants other people to actually pay for the investment, for the infrastructure that you need to be able to do all of that. So the overall summary of today's video is that what we've seen from the data in November so far is encouraging. Inflation on a monthly basis is down to its lowest level for more than 4 years, which is great news. Interest rates have come down, but the problems in Argentina are a long way from being solved. Javier Milei needs to keep on this track. He needs to keep doing what he's doing. And over the next 12 to 18 months, if things continue at the current level, then it's likely that Argentina will start to recover. It will get back into the black. And who knows, it could become a major economy again at some point in the future. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.